The stack of letters bound with twine sat on Catherine Kensington's lap like a weight of broken dreams, each envelope stamped with those crushing words in black ink. Return to sender. She stared out the stage-coach window at the red rock canyons of southeastern Utah, wondering how her entire life had crumbled in the span of 3 months. Boston felt like another world now, and the family she'd left behind to marry Samuel had made their feelings devastatingly clear by sending back every letter she'd written, unopened and unread. "Miss, we're coming up on Monticello," the driver called down. It was May of 1887, and Catherine had never felt more alone. At 22 years old, she'd buried her husband just 2 weeks ago after a sudden fever had taken him, leaving her stranded in a territory she barely knew with no money, no family willing to claim her, and nowhere to go. The small inheritance from Samuel's modest ranch had been consumed by his medical bills and funeral costs. All she had left was the address of a boarding house in Monticello, where she hoped to find work. The stagecoach lurched to a stop, dust billowing around the wheels. Catherine gathered her carpetbag and the bundle of returned letters, stepping down onto the main street of Monticello. The town was small but bustling, nestled in a valley surrounded by those magnificent red and white cliffs that seemed to touch the endless blue sky. False-fronted buildings lined the dirt road, and the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the wooden sidewalks. She asked a passing woman for directions to the boarding house and made her way there, her black mourning dress drawing sympathetic glances. Mrs. Henderson, the boarding house owner, was a kind-faced woman in her 50s who took one look at Catherine's tired eyes and offered her tea before discussing terms. "I can give you room and board in exchange for help with cooking and cleaning," Mrs. Henderson said gently. "I know you've had a terrible loss, dear. Samuel Preston was a good man. This town takes care of its own, and you're one of us now, whether your Boston family thinks so or not." Catherine's eyes filled with tears at the unexpected kindness. "Thank you. I promise I'll work hard." That evening, Catherine sat in her small room under the eaves, the returned letters spread before her on the narrow bed. She picked up her pen, determined to write to her mother one more time to explain, to beg for understanding. But as the pen hovered over the paper, doubt flooded through her. What was the point? They'd made their position clear when she'd married against their wishes. They'd made it even clearer by refusing to read a single word she'd written. A knock at her door startled her. Mrs. Henderson poked her head in. "Dear, would you mind running to the general store before it closes? We need flour and sugar for tomorrow's baking." Catherine quickly wiped her eyes and nodded, grateful for the distraction. She grabbed her shawl and headed out into the cooling evening air. The general store was warm and smelled of coffee, leather, and spices. She was gathering her items when she heard a deep voice behind her. "Madam, you dropped this." She turned to find a tall cowboy holding out one of the returned letters. It must have slipped from her pocket. Heat flooded her cheeks as she saw him glance at the return to sender stamp before carefully handing it to her. He was perhaps 26 or 27, with sun-darkened skin, light brown hair that needed cutting, and startlingly kind hazel eyes beneath the brim of his worn hat. "Thank you," she whispered, taking the letter quickly. He touched his hat brim. "Thaddeus Palmer, madam. Folks call me Thad. I run a ranch about 5 miles north of town." He paused, seeming to struggle with something, then said quietly, "I couldn't help but notice. Are you Mrs. Preston?" "I heard about Samuel. I'm real sorry for your loss." "Yes, I'm Catherine." She clutched the letter, humiliation washing over her. Had he seen? Did he know her own family had rejected her? "I don't mean to pry," Thad said, his voice gentle, But if your letters are coming back unopened, that's a hard thing to bear on top of everything else." Catherine's throat tightened. She couldn't speak without crying, so she just nodded. Thad shifted his weight, clearly uncomfortable but determined. "Look, I know we just met and this might sound strange, but if you need someone to write to, someone who will actually read your words and write back well." He pulled off his hat, running a hand through his hair. "I'm not good with fancy words, but I'm a good listener. Write to me instead." Catherine stared at him, certain she'd misheard. "I beg your pardon. Write to me," he repeated, meeting her eyes steadily. "Nobody should feel like their words don't matter. And maybe it'd be nice to have something to look forward to when I ride into town for supplies. A letter waiting at the post office." "But you don't even know me," she said, bewildered. "Then we'll get to know each other, through letters proper and respectable like." A small smile touched his lips. "Unless you think it's too forward. I just thought, well, sometimes a person needs someone to talk to, and writing things down can help make sense of them." Catherine felt something crack open in her chest, some tight knot of loneliness beginning to loosen. This stranger was offering her something precious, something her own blood had denied her. "Why would you do that?" Thad's expression grew serious. "Because I know what it's like to feel cut off from everyone who's supposed to care about you. My family disowned me 5 years ago when I refused to go into my father's banking business back in St. Louis. Came out here to make my own way. Best decision I ever made, but it hurt like hell for a long time. Still does sometimes." He put his hat back on. "So if I can make it a little easier for someone else, seems like the right thing to do." She found herself nodding before she'd fully thought it through. "All right. Yes, thank you, Mr. Palmer." "Thad," he corrected with a warm smile that transformed his face. "I'll check at the post office when I come to town. You take care now, Mrs. Preston." "Catherine," she said softly. "If we're to be correspondents, you should call me Catherine." He tipped his hat again, and she could swear his eyes brightened. "Catherine it is." That night, Catherine sat at the small desk in her room and wrote her first letter to Thad. The words flowed more easily than any she'd attempted to her family. She told him about the stagecoach ride, about Mrs. Henderson's kindness, about how strange it felt to be in mourning for a marriage that had been more friendship than passion. Samuel had been 20 years her senior, a business associate of her father's who'd offered marriage when she desperately wanted to escape her controlling parents. She'd cared for him, but she couldn't pretend she'd been in love. That admission felt shameful, but somehow, writing to this stranger made honesty easier. She sealed the letter and posted it the next morning. 3 days later, when she went to buy eggs, the postmaster called her over with a grin. "Letter for you, Mrs. Preston, from Thad Palmer's place." Catherine's heart jumped as she took the envelope. She waited until she was back in her room to open it. Thad's handwriting was surprisingly neat, his words direct but thoughtful. He told her about his ranch, how he'd built it from nothing with his own hands and the help of a few good men. He raised cattle and horses, and he'd just acquired a young Mustang mare he was trying to gentle. He wrote about watching the sunrise over the red rocks every morning, how the light turned them shades of orange and pink that no painting could capture. And then, at the end, he wrote something that made her eyes sting with tears. "You don't need to feel ashamed about Samuel. Marriage should be built on respect and kindness, and it sounds like you gave him that. Love comes in different forms, and sometimes the deepest kind grows slowly, like a seed that needs the right conditions. Don't judge yourself so harshly, Catherine. You did the best you could with what life handed you." She read those lines 3 times, pressing the letter to her chest. When had anyone ever told her not to judge herself? Her entire life had been about meeting impossible standards, and she'd failed at every turn in her parents' eyes. She wrote back that same evening. telling him about her childhood in Boston, about the suffocating expectations and the constant criticism, about how she'd thought marriage would be freedom, only to realize she'd traded one cage for another, albeit a gentler one. About the guilt she felt for not grieving Samuel more deeply, for feeling more lost than heartbroken. The letters flew back and forth over the next weeks. Catherine found herself rushing to the post office every few days, her pulse quickening when she saw Thad's handwriting. He wrote about his struggles with the ranch, about a sick calf he'd nursed back to health, about his dreams of expanding his herd. She wrote about learning to bake bread that didn't turn out like rocks, about the wildflowers blooming across the valley, about slowly beginning to feel like maybe she could build a life here. 6 weeks after their first meeting, Catherine was hanging laundry in the boarding house yard when she heard horses approaching. She looked up to see Thad riding toward her, leading a second horse. Her breath caught. They'd exchanged so many words on paper, but seeing him in person sent a flutter through her stomach she wasn't prepared for. He swung down from his saddle, removing his hat. "Catherine, I hope you don't mind me calling. I was bringing some horses to sell in town, and I thought, well, I wondered if you might like to see some of the countryside. There's a canyon about an hour's ride from here that's beautiful this time of year." She glanced at her laundry, at the house, at the propriety she should maintain. Then she thought about those returned letters, about the life of suffocating rules she'd escaped. "I'd love to. Let me tell Mrs. Henderson." Mrs. Henderson gave her approval with a knowing smile. "Thad Palmer is a good man. You go enjoy yourself, dear." Catherine changed into her riding skirt, one of the few practical items she'd acquired since arriving in Utah. As Thad helped her mount the gentle mare he'd brought, his hand steadied her waist for just a moment, and she felt the warmth of his touch through her clothes. They rode out of town together, following a winding trail between towering red rock formations. Thad proved to be an easy companion, pointing out landmarks and telling stories about the area. But there was something different about being together in person. The words that flowed so freely in letters felt more weighted now, charged with the reality of his presence beside her. "I've been looking forward to this," he admitted as they rode. "Your letters, they've become the best part of my week. But I wanted to see you to make sure you're really doing all right." "I'm better than I was," Catherine said honestly. "Thanks in part to you. Your letters helped me feel less alone." "They helped me too," Thad said quietly. "Gets lonely out at the ranch sometimes. Nice to have someone to share thoughts with." They reached the canyon, and Catherine gasped. Sheer walls of striated rock rose around them, bands of red, orange, and cream creating a natural cathedral. A small stream trickled through the canyon floor, creating a ribbon of green vegetation. Thad spread a blanket in a shaded spot and unpacked sandwiches and canteens of water from his saddlebag. As they ate, Catherine found herself studying him. The strong line of his jaw, the calluses on his hands that spoke of hard work, the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled. She described him in her journal as kind, but sitting here with him, she realized he was also handsome in a rugged, unpolished way that made her pulse race. "Can I ask you something?" Thad said, his expression growing serious. "Of course. Your family, the ones who sent back your letters. Do you still hope they'll change their minds?" Catherine was quiet for a long moment, considering. "I used to. Every day at first, but your letters helped me see something. They taught me the difference between people who are supposed to love you and people who actually do. My family, they loved an idea of me, a version that did exactly what they wanted. They never loved the real me." She met his eyes. "You don't even know me fully yet, but you've shown me more genuine care in these weeks than they did in 22 years. Thad reached across the blanket and took her hand. The gesture was bold but felt utterly natural. "I'd like to know you fully, Catherine. Every part. The parts you think are flawed and the parts that shine. All of it." Catherine's breath caught. "Thad, I'm still in mourning." "It wouldn't be proper to, I know," he said quickly. "I'm not asking for anything improper. I'm just being honest about my feelings. I started writing to you thinking I'd be helping someone through a hard time. But your letters, Catherine, they've made me feel things I didn't expect. I look forward to them like nothing else. And sitting here with you now, I can't pretend I don't care for you." "I care for you too," Catherine whispered. "More than I should, perhaps. More than I thought I was capable of feeling." "Then we'll take our time," Thad said, squeezing her hand gently before releasing it. "We'll keep writing, keep getting to know each other. And when enough time has passed and you're ready, if you still feel the same way, well, then we'll see where this goes." Catherine felt tears prick her eyes, but they were good tears, healing tears. "How did you get to be so patient and understanding?" Thad smiled. 5 years of raising livestock teaches you patience. And my mother, before she stopped speaking to me, she was the kindest person I knew. I learned from watching her. She'd be disappointed in how she and my father treated me at the end, but I try to hold onto the good lessons. They spent another hour in the canyon, talking about everything and nothing. When they rode back to town, Catherine felt lighter than she had in months, maybe years. She had something to look forward to now, something that was entirely her own choice. The letters continued, but now they carried a new undercurrent of emotion. Thad wrote about how he'd caught himself smiling while mending a fence, remembering something she'd written. Catherine admitted that she'd started wearing her one nice blue dress on days she expected a letter, wanting to feel pretty even though he wasn't there to see it. The attraction between them grew with every written word, building slowly like a carefully tended fire. 2 months after their canyon ride, Catherine's mourning period was officially over. She'd marked 6 months since Samuel's death, which was the minimum society expected for a widow, though a year was more common. But she and Samuel had no children, and their marriage had been brief. Mrs. Henderson assured her that in the frontier territories, people were more practical about such things. The morning Catherine put away her black dresses and donned a simple green cotton gown, she felt like she was shedding an old skin. She was standing in front of the boarding house enjoying the early July sunshine when Thad rode up. He stopped dead when he saw her, his expression transforming. "Catherine," he breathed, dismounting quickly. "You look beautiful." She blushed, pleased. "Thank you, I thought it was time." "Come to the ranch," he said suddenly. "Come see what I've been writing to you about all these months. Meet my horses, see the land. I'll bring you back before dark, completely respectable." Catherine didn't hesitate. "Yes, absolutely yes." The ride to Thad's ranch took them through some of the most beautiful country Catherine had ever seen. The land rolled and dipped, red rock giving way to grazing land dotted with cattle. Mountains rose in the distance, their peaks still touched with snow even in summer. Thad's ranch was more impressive than she'd imagined from his modest descriptions. The house was solidly built, with a wide porch and windows that looked out over the valley. Corrals held several horses, and she could see a barn and outbuildings. It was clear this was the result of years of back-breaking work and careful management. "You built all this?" she asked, awed. "With help," Thad said, pride evident in his voice. "I've got 3 ranch hands who work for me. They're out moving cattle today. Come on, I'll show you around." He introduced her to his horses, including the Mustang mare he'd been gentling, who now ate apple pieces from Catherine's hand without fear. They walked the property, Thad pointing out where he planned to build a bigger barn, where he wanted to plant an orchard. He spoke with such passion about his dreams that Catherine found herself falling even deeper. This man had built something real from nothing, had refused to let his family's rejection break him. They ended up on his porch as the afternoon grew hot, drinking cool water from his well and watching the horses graze. Catherine felt a profound sense of peace settling over her. This place felt right in a way Boston never had, in a way Samuel's small property never had. "Catherine," Thad said, setting down his cup and turning to face her. "I want to be clear about my intentions. I'm courting you, properly and officially. I want everyone to know that I care for you and that I hope in time you'll consider becoming my wife." Catherine's heart soared. "Yes. Yes to courting me. And Thad, you don't have to wait long for an answer to that other question. I already know my answer is yes." Thad's eyes widened. "You do?" "I learned something these past months," Catherine said, reaching for his hand. "Life is too short and too uncertain to wait for perfect timing. Samuel's death taught me that. Your letters taught me what it feels like when someone truly sees you and cares anyway. I don't need more time to know that I love you, Thad Palmer. I love your kindness and your strength and the way you see beauty in everything. I love how you made me feel worthy when my own family didn't. So yes, when you're ready to ask properly, my answer is yes." Thad stood, pulling her to her feet, his hands cupping her face with infinite gentleness. "Catherine Kensington, will you marry me? Will you build a life with me here on this land and let me spend every day trying to deserve you?" "Yes," she whispered, and then his lips were on hers, soft and sure and full of promise. The kiss was everything her first kiss with Samuel hadn't been, full of passion and tenderness and a future filled with possibility. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Thad rested his forehead against hers. "I'll do right by you," he promised. "I'll make sure you never feel unwanted again." "You already have," Catherine said, "from the moment you told me to write to you instead." They were married in August, in the small church in Monticello with Mrs. Henderson and half the town in attendance. Catherine wore a cream-colored dress that Mrs. Henderson and the other women had helped her sew, with wildflowers from the valley in her hair. Thad wore his one good suit, but Catherine thought he'd never looked more handsome than when he turned to watch her walk down the aisle, his eyes shining with love and wonder. The preacher pronounced them husband and wife, and when Thad kissed her, the congregation erupted in applause and cheers. Catherine felt joy explode in her chest. This was what marriage should feel like, this sense of rightness and partnership and genuine affection. The reception was held at the boarding house, with food and music and dancing. As Thad spun her around the floor, Catherine caught sight of Mrs. Henderson wiping happy tears from her eyes. This town had embraced her when her own family wouldn't. These people had become her family. That evening, Thad brought her home to the ranch as his wife. He carried her over the threshold, both of them laughing, and set her down gently in the living room. Catherine looked around at the space that was now hers, at the home they would build together. "Happy?" Thad asked, pulling her close. "Happier than I knew I could be," Catherine said honestly. She thought of those returned letters, the ones that had broken her heart. She'd burned them the night before her wedding, watching them turn to ash in Mrs. Henderson's fireplace. They didn't matter anymore. She had a husband who would read every word she wrote, who would listen to every word she spoke, who would see her and love her exactly as she was. Their first months of marriage were a blissful adjustment. Catherine threw herself into making the ranch house a home, sewing curtains and planting a vegetable garden. She learned to cook for ranch hands and to help with the horses. Thad was an attentive, passionate husband who made her feel cherished in ways she'd never experienced. They would sit on the porch in the evenings, talking about their days, and Catherine would think about how different this was from her marriage to Samuel, how much more alive she felt. In October, Catherine realized she was pregnant. She told Thad over breakfast, watching his face transform from confusion to comprehension to pure joy. He whooped and picked her up, spinning her carefully before setting her down and immediately apologizing for jostling her. "Are you happy?" she asked, laughing at his excitement. "Happy doesn't begin to cover it," Thad said, kneeling down and pressing a kiss to her still flat stomach. "Hello in there, little one. Your pa can't wait to meet you." Catherine ran her fingers through his hair, love overwhelming her. This was everything she dreamed of and more. A partner who was truly present, who shared her joy, who wanted to build a family with her based on love rather than obligation or social expectation. The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the winter. Catherine continued to help around the ranch as much as she could, and Thad became almost comically protective, insisting she rest frequently and avoid anything he deemed too strenuous. His ranch hands teased him mercilessly about it, and Catherine loved seeing this softer side of him. In January, a letter arrived at the ranch. Catherine was alone when the mail was delivered, and she froze when she saw the return address. Boston. Her mother's handwriting, with shaking hands she opened it. The letter was brief and cold. Her younger sister was getting married in March, and her parents wanted Catherine to know she was not welcome at the wedding. They'd heard through business contacts that she'd already remarried, scandalously quickly, and they considered her behavior shameful. The letter concluded with a statement that they considered her no longer part of the family and asked her not to contact them again. Catherine read it twice, waiting for the pain to hit. But instead of devastation, she felt only a distant sadness for what might have been, followed by a fierce gratitude for what she actually had. She walked to the kitchen stove and fed the letter to the fire, watching it burn. When Thad came in for lunch, he found her humming as she stirred soup, one hand resting on her rounded belly. "You're in a good mood," he observed, kissing her cheek. "I am," Catherine said, turning to embrace him. "I got a letter from my family today." Thad tensed. "What did they say?" "It doesn't matter," Catherine said honestly. "They wanted to hurt me, I think, by making sure I knew I wasn't welcome in their lives. But Thad, I don't need them. I have you. I have this baby. I have a home and a community that actually cares about me. They can't hurt me anymore because they have no power over my happiness." Thad held her tight, and she could feel his heart beating against her cheek. "I'm proud of you," he said. "That took strength." "You gave me that strength," Catherine said, "by showing me what real love looks like." Their son was born in May of 1888, on a bright spring morning when the wildflowers were blooming across the valley. The labor was long and difficult, but when Catherine finally held her baby boy, she understood a depth of love she'd never imagined possible. Thad was at her side through the whole ordeal, holding her hand, whispering encouragement, and when he first held his son, tears streamed down his face. "What should we name him?" Catherine asked, exhausted but elated. Thad looked at her with so much love she felt her breath catch. "I was thinking James after my grandfather. He was the only one who supported my decision to come west. Died before my parents cut me off, but he would have been on my side." "James Palmer," Catherine said, testing it out. "I love it. Hello, James. Welcome to your family." The baby let out a lusty wail, and they both laughed. Their family. Not the families they'd been born into, but the one they'd chosen and created together. The years that followed were full and rich. Catherine had never worked so hard in her life, between raising James, helping with the ranch, and managing the household. But she'd also never felt so fulfilled. Thad was an involved father, spending his evenings playing with James, teaching him about the horses as soon as he could walk, telling him stories on the porch at sunset. In the fall of 1889, Catherine gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Lydia. She had Thad's hazel eyes and Catherine's dark hair, and her older brother was immediately smitten with her. James, just 18 months old, would pat her head gently and say, "Baby," with such pride that it made Catherine's heart melt. The ranch continued to prosper. Thad's reputation for quality horses spread, and he started getting buyers from as far away as Colorado and New Mexico. He hired more help and began making plans to expand. Catherine started a small business of her own, selling eggs and butter in town, and discovered she had a knack for negotiation and commerce. One evening in the summer of 1890, Catherine and Thad sat on their porch, watching 3-year-old James chase fireflies while baby Lydia slept in Catherine's arms. The sun was setting, painting the red rocks in shades of gold and crimson. "You ever think about writing to your family?" Thad asked quietly. "Now that you've built such a good life, to show them what you've accomplished." Catherine considered it, then shook her head. "No, I used to think about it sometimes, about proving them wrong, but I don't need their validation anymore. This life, our children, it's all real and good regardless of whether they acknowledge it." She smiled at him. "Besides, I have you to write to if I need to sort out my thoughts." "You still have that first letter I sent you?" Thad asked. "Of course. I have all of them. They're in the trunk in our bedroom, tied with ribbon." Catherine shifted Lydia in her arms. "Why?" "Just thinking about that day in the general store when you dropped that returned letter. I almost didn't say anything, almost just handed it back and walked away. But something made me speak up, made me offer to be a correspondent." "What was it?" Catherine asked, curious. He'd never told her this before. Thad was quiet for a moment, watching James shriek with laughter as he caught a firefly in his small hands. "You looked so lost, so utterly alone. And I remembered that feeling from when my family first cut me off. I thought if I could spare someone else even a little of that pain, I should try." He reached over and took Catherine's free hand. "Best impulse I ever followed. Changed my whole life." "Changed mine too," Catherine said, squeezing his hand. "Saved it, really. I don't know what would have become of me if I'd had to go through all that alone." "You're stronger than you think," Thad said. "You would have survived." "But I'm grateful every day that I got to be there, got to help, got to fall in love with you." Catherine leaned over and kissed him, careful not to jostle the sleeping baby. "I love you, Thad Palmer. Thank you for telling me to write to you instead." As the summer of 1891 arrived, the ranch was thriving more than ever. Thad had become one of the most respected ranchers in the area, known for his fair dealing and quality stock. Catherine had expanded her egg business and was now also selling preserves and baked goods, which had become popular throughout the county. Their children were healthy and happy. James, now a rambunctious 4-year-old, and Lydia, a curious 2-year-old who was determined to keep up with her brother. One afternoon in late June, Catherine was in town making deliveries when she noticed a commotion at the post office. A well-dressed couple in their 50s was asking the postmaster questions, and something about the woman's profile made Catherine's heart skip. She moved closer, telling herself she was imagining things. But then the woman turned, and Catherine found herself face to face with her mother for the first time in 4 years. Her mother's eyes widened in shock. "Catherine." "Mother," Catherine said, her voice steady despite the chaos of emotions inside her. Her father stood behind her mother, looking uncomfortable but not hostile. "We didn't know you'd still be here," her mother said, and Catherine noticed the woman looked older, more tired than she remembered. "We came to Utah on business with your father's firm. Someone mentioned a Catherine Preston, now Palmer, and we thought we should see." "Well, you've seen me," Catherine said, lifting her chin. "I'm doing very well, thank you for asking." Her mother flinched at the pointed words. "Catherine, we should talk. Perhaps somewhere private," Catherine thought of Thad, of her children, of the life she'd built. Then she thought of those returned letters, of that final cruel missive telling her she was no longer family. Why? What could you possibly have to say to me that matters now? We made mistakes, her father said, speaking for the first time. His voice was gruff, but carried a note of something that might have been regret. Your mother and we've had time to think, especially after your sister's marriage fell apart within 6 months. I'm sorry to hear that, Catherine said, and meant it. She'd never wished ill on her sister. Can we buy you lunch? Her mother asked. Please, just give us an hour. Catherine almost refused. But curiosity won out, and perhaps a small part of her that still remembered being their daughter wanted to hear what they had to say. 1 hour. The cafe down the street. Over sandwiches that Catherine barely tasted, her parents explained. Her sister's husband had been charming during courtship but turned cruel after the wedding. He'd lost her dowry gambling and then abandoned her, running off to California. Her sister was back living with them, depressed and ashamed. The experience had apparently opened their eyes to how little they'd actually known about what made a good marriage, how much they'd prioritized appearances over substance. We were wrong about Samuel, her mother said quietly. We thought you'd married beneath you, thrown away your prospects for nothing. But we've learned he was a kind man who treated you well, and we were wrong to send back your letters. Your father insisted on it. He was so angry that you defied him. I was a fool, her father admitted, and he looked genuinely troubled. A proud fool. I wanted to control your life, and when you chose your own path, I wanted to punish you. But Catherine, the things we've learned about some of the men in our social circle since then, men we would have chosen for you, you're better off without them. Catherine sat back, processing this. It wasn't exactly an apology, but it was more than she'd ever expected from them. I appreciate you telling me this, but I need you to understand something. I don't need your approval anymore. I did once, desperately, but not now. I have a good life here. A wonderful husband, beautiful children, a home I love. We'd like to meet them, her mother said tentatively. Your husband and children, if you're willing. Catherine thought about it. She could refuse, could protect her family from these people who'd hurt her so badly. But she also thought about Thad's parents, how he still felt the pain of that separation years later. About how James and Lydia deserved the chance to know their grandparents, even imperfect ones, if those grandparents were willing to be present in their lives. I'll need to discuss it with my husband first, Catherine said. If he's willing, you may come to our ranch tomorrow for dinner. But understand this, I won't tolerate any criticism of my life, my home, or my husband. And if you ever make my children feel less than, you'll never see us again. Her parents agreed quickly, almost eagerly. Catherine left the cafe feeling shaken but also empowered. She wasn't the scared young woman who'd fled Boston anymore. She was a wife, a mother, a businesswoman, a partner in a thriving ranch. She had nothing to prove to them. Thad listened carefully that evening as Catherine explained everything. When she finished, he pulled her into his arms. It's your choice, he said. I'll support whatever you decide. But Catherine, I want you to make sure you're doing this for the right reasons. If you're hoping they'll finally give you the love you deserved as a child, you might end up disappointed. I know, Catherine said. I'm not expecting that, but maybe we can have something, some limited relationship for the children's sake, and maybe, just maybe, people can change. They're here, they're trying. That's more than they've done before. Then we'll have them to dinner, Thad agreed. But at the first sign of disrespect toward you, they're gone. Her parents arrived the next afternoon in a hired carriage, looking out of place in their fine Eastern clothes. Catherine watched her mother's face as she took in the ranch, the well-maintained buildings, the quality horses in the corrals. She saw surprise and something that might have been approval. James ran to greet the strangers with his characteristic enthusiasm, Lydia toddling behind him. Catherine watched her mother's expression soften as James chattered about his pony, and Lydia reached up with chubby arms to be held. "These are your grandparents," Catherine told her children. "They've come from very far away to meet you." Dinner was awkward at first, but Thad's natural courtesy and the children's innocent enthusiasm helped ease the tension. Catherine's father asked intelligent questions about the ranch, seeming genuinely interested in Thad's answers. Her mother helped clear dishes, insisting despite Catherine's protests, and complimented the meal. After dinner, while the children played in the yard, her father pulled Thad aside. Catherine couldn't hear what was said, but she saw her father extend his hand and Thad shake it, both men's expressions serious but not unfriendly. Later, her mother approached Catherine as she was putting Lydia to bed. "You have a beautiful home," she said softly. "And your husband clearly adores you. I can see it in how he looks at you." "He does," Catherine said, settling Lydia in her crib. "He's my partner in every sense of the word. We built this life together." "I'm glad," her mother said, and her eyes were wet. "I'm glad you found what we failed to give you, a home where you're valued and loved." Catherine felt her own eyes sting with tears. "I wish it hadn't taken so long for you to see it." "So do I," her mother whispered. "I can't undo those years, Catherine. But if you'll allow it, I'd like to try to be a proper grandmother to your children, to know them as they grow." Catherine looked at this woman who'd given birth to her but never really known her. She would never forget those returned letters, never stop feeling the scar they'd left. But she could choose to move forward, to let her children have grandparents, to model forgiveness even when it was hard. "We can try," Catherine said. "Letters to start, and maybe visits if things go well, but Thad and I make the decisions about our family. You're welcome to be part of it, but not to dictate it." "I understand," her mother said. "Thank you for this chance." Her parents left the next day, promising to write. Catherine watched their carriage disappear down the road, feeling Thad's arm come around her waist. "How do you feel?" he asked. "Complicated," Catherine admitted, "but mostly okay. They can't hurt me anymore because my happiness doesn't depend on them, and maybe the kids will benefit from having more family." "Your call always," Thad said, kissing her temple. "I'm proud of how you handled that." The letters from her parents started arriving regularly, and true to her mother's word, they focused on asking about the children and expressing interest in the ranch. Catherine responded politely, but kept the correspondence light. The relationship would never be what it should have been, but it was something. In the spring of 1892, Catherine discovered she was pregnant again. This time there was no apprehension, only joy. James was excited about being a big brother again, and Lydia, now 3, seemed to understand in her own way that something special was coming. Their third child, another son they named Thomas, was born in December during the first snowfall of the season. He came into the world easily, as if he couldn't wait to join the family, and his older siblings were immediately devoted to him. Catherine's parents sent gifts for the baby, along with a letter asking if they might visit in the spring. Catherine discussed it with Thad, and together they agreed. The visit went well enough that it became an annual tradition. The relationship would never be close, but it existed, and Catherine found she could appreciate the effort even while recognizing its limitations. The years rolled by in a rhythm of hard work and simple pleasures. The ranch grew, Thad's reputation along with it. Catherine's business expanded, and she hired 2 local women to help with production. James grew into a responsible young man who loved the ranch as much as his father did. Lydia showed a gift for working with horses, gentling even the most skittish mares. Thomas was the storyteller of the family, always spinning elaborate tales that kept everyone entertained on long winter evenings. In 1897, Catherine found herself standing on the same porch where she'd stood so many times before, but this time with 10 years of marriage behind her. Thad came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "Everything," Catherine said, leaning back against him. "How different my life is from what I thought it would be, how much better it is." "Any regrets?" Thad asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. "Not a single one," Catherine said, turning in his arms to face him. "Well, maybe one tiny regret. I wish I'd met you first, before Samuel, before Boston, before all of it." "Then you wouldn't be who you are," Thad pointed out. "All of it, even the hard parts, made you the woman I love. The woman who's strong enough to build a business, raise 3 children, manage a household, and still find time to make me feel like the luckiest man in Utah." Catherine laughed. "Just Utah, not the whole country." "The whole world," Thad corrected, kissing her soundly. "The whole world." That night, as they lay in bed with moonlight streaming through the windows, Catherine thought about those returned letters one last time. She'd never regretted burning them, never wished she'd kept them as a reminder of the pain. The only letters she'd kept were Thad's, still in that trunk, still tied with ribbon. Sometimes she'd read through them, marveling at how their relationship had unfolded across those pages. "Thad," she said quietly. He responded, already half asleep. "Thank you for writing back. For every letter, every word." She felt him smile against her hair. "Best correspondence I ever started." By 1899, James was 11 and already invaluable help on the ranch. Lydia, at 8, had developed such a way with horses that people were starting to ask if she could help train their difficult animals. Thomas, at 6, was learning to read with a voraciousness that amazed his parents. Catherine and Thad watched their children grow with pride and wonder. The ranch had expanded significantly. They now ran several hundred head of cattle and had developed a reputation for breeding exceptional working horses. Thad had hired a foreman to help manage the day-to-day operations, which gave him more time with his family. Catherine's business had become a substantial enterprise, with her products sold in 3 counties. On their 12th anniversary, Thad presented Catherine with a gift that made her cry. He'd commissioned a woodworker to create a beautiful box, carved with scenes of their ranch, with a brass plate that read. Her letters home came back unopened, so he said, "Write to me instead." "I never want you to forget," Thad said as she traced the engraving with trembling fingers, "that every good thing in our lives started with choosing each other, with taking a chance on writing to a stranger." Catherine opened the box to find all of her letters to him, carefully preserved, organized by date. "You kept them all?" "Every single one," Thad confirmed. "They're precious to me. They show how we fell in love, how we built trust word by word. Someday, when we're old and gray, we can read through them and remember." Catherine threw her arms around him, the box pressed between them. "I love you so much, more than I ever thought I could love anyone." "Same here," Thad said, holding her tight. "You took my life from good to extraordinary." As the new century approached, the Palmer family prepared to celebrate at a community gathering in Monticello. Catherine looked around at her family, at the community that had embraced her, at the life she'd built from the ashes of rejection and loss. James was dancing with a girl from town, blushing whenever she smiled at him. Lydia was holding court with a group of boys, telling them with great authority about the proper way to train a colt. Thomas was performing an impromptu puppet show for the younger children, making them shriek with laughter. And Thad, her wonderful husband, was standing with his arm around her waist, looking at her with the same love she'd seen in his eyes since that day in the general store 13 years ago. "Happy?" he asked, the question he'd been asking since their wedding night. "Happier than I ever dreamed possible," Catherine answered honestly. She thought of that broken young widow who'd arrived in Monticello with nothing but returned letters and shattered dreams. She'd been so lost, so convinced she was unwanted and unlovable. How wrong she'd been. Or rather, how wrong her family had been about her worth. It had taken a kind cowboy with hazel eyes and a generous heart to show her the truth, that she deserved love and partnership and respect. That her words mattered, her thoughts mattered, she mattered. The clock struck midnight, and the crowd erupted in cheers. 1900, a new century full of new possibilities. Catherine kissed her husband as their children gathered around them, and she knew with absolute certainty that whatever the future held, they would face it together. The years continued to pass in a sweet rhythm. In 1902, Catherine gave birth to their fourth child, a daughter they named Rose, who had her father's smile and her mother's determination. The family adjusted easily to the new addition, with the older children doting on their baby sister. When Rose was 2, Catherine's mother passed away unexpectedly. Her father wrote asking Catherine to come to Boston for the funeral, and after much discussion, Catherine and Thad decided to make the journey. It would be the first time she'd returned to her hometown since leaving nearly 2 decades before. Boston felt alien to Catherine now, too crowded and noisy after the wide, open spaces of Utah. The funeral was formal and cold, full of people Catherine barely remembered. Her father looked old and frail, and her sister, still unmarried after her disastrous first marriage, seemed brittle and unhappy. The reading of the will brought a surprise. Her mother had left Catherine a substantial sum of money, along with a letter written just months before her death. Catherine opened it in the privacy of her hotel room, Thad sitting beside her. "My dear Catherine," the letter read, "I write this knowing I may not have much time left. My heart has been weak for months and the doctors offer little hope. I want you to know that watching you build your life in Utah, seeing the family you created, has been one of the few joys of my later years. You showed courage I never possessed, leaving everything to forge your own path. I'm sorry I didn't appreciate it sooner. I'm sorry for those returned letters most of all. I hope this inheritance can provide some security for you and your children. Be happy, my daughter. You deserve it, Mother." Catherine wept, not for the woman her mother had been in her youth, but for the glimpses of who she might have become had she found her own courage sooner. Thad held her, letting her grieve for the relationship they'd never quite managed to repair fully, even as she felt gratitude for the attempt. They returned to Utah with mixed feelings but also with relief. As the train carried them home through changing landscapes, Catherine realized she was homesick for the red rocks, the big sky, the ranch and the life they'd built. Boston held only ghosts now. Utah held her future. The inheritance from her mother provided funds to expand further. Catherine invested in her business, building a proper commercial kitchen and hiring more staff. She also set aside money for each of the children's futures, whatever they might choose. Thad used his portion to improve the ranch's water access, building a system of wells and irrigation that would benefit them for generations. By 1910, James was 22 and running much of the ranch's daily operations. He'd married a sweet girl named Emma from a neighboring ranch, and they had a baby on the way. Lydia, 19, had no interest in marriage yet, too focused on her work with horses. She'd gained a reputation as one of the best horse trainers in the territory and had buyers coming from several states. Thomas, 17, was preparing to attend college in Salt Lake City, planning to study literature and journalism. Little Rose, now 8, was showing signs of inheriting her mother's business acumen, already running a successful enterprise selling hand-painted rocks to tourists. Catherine and Thad, now in their 40s, settled into a new phase of life. They'd built something lasting, something that would continue after them. Their love had only deepened with time, weathering challenges and celebrating triumphs together. One evening, they sat on their porch as they'd done countless times before. But this time, James and Emma were in their old bedroom with baby John, the newest generation of Palmers. The sound of the baby's cries and Emma's soothing voice drifted through the open window. "Grandpa," Thad said, testing the word. "How did we get old enough for that?" Catherine laughed. "Speak for yourself, I feel ancient." "You're beautiful," Thad said, and the sincerity in his voice made her believe it. "More beautiful than the day I met you." "Liar," Catherine said fondly. "But I'll take it." They sat in comfortable silence, hands linked between their chairs. Catherine thought about the journey that had brought them here, from that chance meeting in the general store to this moment, surrounded by family and the life they'd built together. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I hadn't offered to write to you?" Thad asked, echoing her thoughts. "Sometimes," Catherine admitted. "I think I would have survived, would have found a way, but I wouldn't have had this. Wouldn't have had you, or our children, or this particular beautiful life. So I'm grateful every day that you took that chance." "Me too," Thad said. "Best impulse I ever followed." As the sun set over the red rocks, painting the sky in impossible shades of orange and pink and purple, Catherine reflected on the strange paths life could take. How rejection could lead to belonging, how loss could lead to love, how the ending of one story could be the beginning of a better one. Those letters her family had returned unopened all those years ago had seemed like the end of everything. But they'd actually been the beginning of real love, real family, real home. Because a kind cowboy had seen her pain and offered her something simple but profound. Someone who would listen, who would read her words, who would care. "Write to me instead," he'd said, and in those 4 words he'd changed everything. Thad squeezed her hand and Catherine squeezed back, a conversation without words after 23 years of marriage. They'd written their story together, word by word, letter by letter, day by day. And it was a story with a happy ending, the kind Catherine had never dared to dream about in those dark days after Samuel's death when her own family had rejected her. She'd found her family instead, in a cowboy with hazel eyes and a generous heart, in the children they'd raised together, in the community that had welcomed her, in the land itself, this wild, beautiful country that had become her true home. The stars began to emerge, brilliant in the darkening sky. From inside, she heard Rose laughing at something Thomas had said. Lydia's voice joined in, teasing her brother. James was singing a lullaby to his son, his deep voice tender. This was everything. This was enough. This was more than enough. This was love. Catherine had spent her girlhood believing love was duty and obligation, had spent her first marriage learning it could be friendship and respect. But Thad had taught her the full truth of it. Love was choosing each other day after day. Love was building something together, brick by brick, word by word. Love was weathering storms and celebrating sunshine. Love was someone saying, "Write to me instead," and meaning it with their whole heart. Years later, when Catherine was 70 years old and Thad was 74, they celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary surrounded by children, grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren. The ranch was now run primarily by James and his sons, though Thad still rode out most mornings to check on things. Catherine's business had been passed to Rose, who'd expanded it beyond anything Catherine had imagined. At the anniversary party, held on a perfect June day with the whole community in attendance, their eldest grandson asked Catherine to tell the story of how she and Grandpa had met. Catherine smiled and looked at Thad, who nodded encouragingly. "Well," she began, "I came to Monticello as a young widow with nothing but a bag of clothes and a heart full of returned letters. I felt like nobody in the world cared whether I lived or died. And then I met your grandfather in a general store, and he saw one of those letters, and he did something extraordinary." "What did he do?" the little ones asked, even though they'd heard the story before. "He told me to write to him instead," Catherine said, her eyes never leaving Thad's face. "And I did. And through those letters we fell in love. We built trust and friendship and eventually a life together, all because he cared enough to offer to listen." "That's so romantic," one of the granddaughters sighed. "It was," Catherine agreed. "It is. Every day with your grandfather has been a gift, even the hard days, because we faced them together." Thad stood and pulled Catherine to her feet, leading her into a slow dance even though no music was playing. Their family gathered around them and someone started playing a fiddle, and then everyone was dancing under the big Utah sky. That night, alone in their room, Catherine and Thad held each other close. They were old now, their bodies marked by time and hard work and the simple passage of years. But Catherine had never loved him more than she did in that moment. 50 years, Thad said wonderingly. "Feels like a lifetime and like no time at all." "I'd do it all again," Catherine said. "Every moment. I'd write that first letter to you 1,000 times over." "And I'd read it every time," Thad promised, "and write back, and fall in love with you all over again." They both knew they didn't have forever. No one did. But they had this moment, and they had the decades of moments behind them, and they had the legacy they'd built together that would continue long after they were gone. Catherine thought one last time about those returned letters, about the young woman she'd been who'd felt so rejected and alone. If she could go back and tell that younger self anything, it would be this: the best is yet to come. The love you deserve is waiting for you. All you have to do is be brave enough to accept it when it's offered. "Write to me instead," Thad had said, and in saying yes, Catherine had written herself a new story. A love story. A story with a happy ending, their happy ending.